So, who is Carl Jung? Let's go ahead and jump into this very complicated topic. But I want to say that we're going to be doing these kind of like we're having a cup of coffee. I hope you can grab a cup of coffee, cup of tea, whatever your drink beverage of choice is, because this is a very interesting character to whom I believe deserves the title of theologian. A lot of people really don't really know where to put Carl Jung in their categorization for good reason. And the guy was kind of all over the place, but very, very brilliant, very, very focused on what he was going after. And I really think that he's going to be chalked up down the road as being one of the best theologians the church has ever seen. Welcome to the Christian Jung. I'm Angela Meir. I'm a PhD theology student with 2 advanced degrees in Carl Jung's psychology. In my own longing for a deeply transformative Christian experience, I found that the psychologist Carl Jung had already provided us with tools that are deeply biblical and aligned with the Christian faith. The rich spiritual tradition that we inherited from the Celtic saints, the Desert Fathers, and the Book of Acts is available for us today. Let's journey together as we discover the spirit in Christianity and water the dry, aching areas of our soul. So I want to start by saying that there are a lot of different people out there who have said a lot of different things about Carl Jung. In fact, if I remember correctly, if you look him up in Wikipedia, they call him the father of the modern New Age movement. So, that's already a very confusing thing to say for someone who I think is very clearly Christian. People can debate with me on that one, which is fine, but I like to take 2 things in consideration when we consider Carl Jung. And the first thing is the fact that he talked about being a Christian on his own several times in his own kind of semi-autobiography, which is Memoirs, Dreams, Reflections, very well-known book, the best book you can read about Carl Jung, in my opinion. Secondly, his theories in the beginning of his life and the theories at the end of his life are different in regards to this. Towards the end of Carl Jung's life, he very much was going after a Christian audience, believe it or not. And he even brings that up in Memoirs, Dreams, Reflections. And in fact, it says that his book that he wrote for a Christian audience, which was Answer to Job, was so poorly understood and really the feedback on it was terrible. It broke his heart, and he brings that up in his reflections. And even the fact that he really felt like his calling was to, quote, reanimate the spirit for Christians. And it's a calling that he felt he failed at. And so what do you do with a man who was so far ahead of his time? And so I try and look at all of what he has done, which is enormous. He was an incredibly prolific writer. I look at the scope of Carl Jung's work, and I really think that with the scope of it and with these 2 things in mind, that he had come to terms with his calling to Christians later on in his life, we can kind of begin to look at his material out of a lens of somebody who I'll be honest, I think he came to Christianity similarly to C.S. Lewis, in the sense that he didn't necessarily want to be persuaded, but was. And so, with C.S. Lewis, and, it says that he was kind of, a reluctant convert, I believe is the word he used. And I feel the same thing about Carl Jung. We should probably start with the interview that everyone questioned.
What sort of religious upbringing did your father keep?
Oh, we were Swiss before.
And did he make you attend church
Oh,
regularly?
well, that was quite natural. Everybody went to church on Saturday.
And did you believe in God?
Oh, yes.
Do you now believe in God?
Now, difficult to answer. I know. I don't need to believe. I know.
And in that interview, he's asked point blank, "Are you a Christian? Or do you believe in God?" Is what I believe is the question they asked him. Do you believe in God? And Carl Jung's reaction was not an easy response, right? What he said was, um, I don't have to believe in God. I know God, something to those effects. And maybe that's the best place to start with this podcast. Number one is to say, well, let's talk about what does that mean. So Carl Jung was raised by a third generation minister. His father was a Swiss Reform minister, third generation, and there was always a very challenging um, relationship between young Carl Jung and his minister father. And the challenging relationship was in the fact that Carl Jung very early on was aware of his father's own misgivings about his faith, about his own challenges and confusions about his own faith. And because he saw his father wrestle through the concept of faith, he really kind of put a bad taste in Carl Jung's mouth about just the concept of faith, right? And so um, when we talk about faith, it means it's this idea of you have to take a leap towards something. You have to believe in something beyond your reason. Carl Jung did not believe that that was something that we should have going for us, right? He thought that if we have a mind, we need to be using our mind, right? And so what you start to see with this character, Carl Jung, is that he begins to question his faith from a very early age. He has these experiences from a very early age that are seem to be the opposite of what he's been taught in church, right? About a God who is holy, a God who is loving, and he has these kinds of challenging experiences with God early on in his youth that cause him to kind of question whether or not the Christian God was what he was working with, right? And so you see him go on this journey through his life where he's processing these things out. And he's as he gets older in his life, you start to see that he has more and more ease in conversing about Christianity and particularly about Christ. There is an interesting seminar he gives in 1925. I did a report on this one for class. And in 1925, he gave a seminar about one of his main topics of his psychology is the archetype. We'll go into that later. But what he did is he took this archetype of Elijah and he did this whole kind of like he took all of these different mythologies and he compared it. Let's see. Taking the biblical character of Elijah, who we know is a main prophet in the biblical character, and he took that biblical character and he ran it through all these different types of mythologies. He ran it through a Greek mythology, he ran it through a Sanskrit mythology, and the list goes on. But what he never does is run it through a Hebrew or even a Christian mythology. And I thought to myself, that was so strange to pull something out of the Bible, never utilize it in its primary context, but to run it through all of these other types of mythologies to kind of grapple with the symbology of what this Elijah character means. And it dawns on me that later on in his life, as he begins to grapple a little bit more with Christ as a primary image in his own psychology, that he kind of went through a intellectual conversion at some point through his life. Because by the time he gets to answer to Job, the desire of his heart was to kind of reawaken something in the Christian faith that he felt had died and was dead. He felt that it was a a dead religion, and it was his desire to see that Christianity kind of be what he called reanimated. And so from 1925 until his death, which was in the early 60s, there was a massive shift, I believe, for Carl Jung. So we do need to keep this in mind when we're considering him, that some of his early work is not necessarily aligned with Christianity. However, I think there's something really powerful about that, and that is because Carl Jung was a self-admitted empiricist, a scientific empiricist. And let's take a few moments to discuss what that means, because I think it's important to realize that this is how he defined himself from beginning all the way through his life. And I actually think he chose this type of we call it epistemological foundation. So epistemological means where are we getting our knowledge from, right? And he was an empiricist. He believed that knowledge needed to come through experiential, hands-on kind of knowledge, which kind of set him apart from other people in his field. So early on, when Carl Jung was deciding what he was wanting to do with his life, he decided to go into psychiatry, and he immediately went to work at a mental hospital near where he lived in Switzerland. And in this mental hospital, he dealt with quite a few schizophrenics, a variety of mental illnesses. And he did something that nobody had ever done particularly with schizophrenics. And that was he took them very seriously. Instead of bypassing the symbolic language that they were using to describe, their visions or their episodes, he took it very seriously. And I don't think anyone has ever done that. And quite honestly, that's a very loving thing to do, to actually be very considerate that even if we don't understand where someone is coming from, for him to sit down and say, I believe that this symbolic language that you're speaking to me in means something, it matters something, and it matters, and we need to take it seriously. I honestly don't think anyone's done that in mental health before or since, in that level of real care for the patient, in the sense that he felt like they were trying to explain where they were at as best as they knew how, and that was in symbolic language. And so as he was working with various patients, what he did as an empiricist is he took those visions, those schizophrenic episodes, those various things that they were saying, dreams that they may have had, and he took them very seriously, and he began to process with the patients what those symbols may mean, and what it was speaking about the psyche. And he came away saying, well, the psyche has a language, and that language is symbol and it's image. And it's very interesting to me, because I was reading this morning the Torah portion, and it's in the book of Numbers where Yahweh gives a very detailed list of things about the red heifer and the things that Israel had to do to maintain their sacredness, maintain their holiness. And there was a lot of symbolic things that Yahweh had them do. Let's just take a second to read that passage. I'm reading out of Numbers 19. The Lord says to Moses and Aaron, here is another legal requirement commanded by the Lord. Tell the people of Israel to bring you a red heifer, a perfect animal that has no defects and has never been yoked to a plow. Give it to Eleazar the priest, and it will be taken outside the camp and slaughtered in his presence. Eleazar will take some of its blood on his finger and sprinkle it 7 times toward the front of the tabernacle. As Eleazar watches, the heifer must be burned, its hide, meat, blood, and dung. Eleazar the priest must then take, listen to this is very interesting. Eleazar the priest must then take a stick of cedar, a hyssop branch, and some scarlet yarn, and throw them into the fire where the heifer is burning. This is so interesting to me because Yahweh is in the process right now of establishing the way it needs to be between him and Israel. And in that process, he commands them to do a lot of different things. In fact, if you go and you read about Moses going and getting water from the rock for the Israelites, one of the things that God says to him is that when he does it out of anger, God then says to him, "You did not do this out of holiness. You did not do this in honor of my holiness." In other words, God was saying, "I gave you particular instructions on how you needed to get this water from the rock, and you didn't do that. And by doing so, you violated my holiness, which is my sacredness, my others would say my otherness." I think otherness is a very interesting word to use for holy. And this is something that actually comes into Jungian psychology, because Jung would eventually come to say that the goal of the psyche is its own individuation. That's a big word, but it's an important, in fact, I believe it's the cornerstone word for Jungian psychology, in the sense that individuation is the thing that your psyche, your soul, is wanting to do. In the Greek, when we look at the word psyche, it's the soul and the psyche are kind of used interchangeably. Suki, right, is the Greek word there. So do we know if there's a difference between our soul and our psyche? I'm not sure. We don't know. But I will say this, that God very symbolically told the Israelites in this passage what they must do to maintain their holiness. But these things are symbolic. They mean things. You don't take a stick of cedar, a hyssop branch, and some scarlet yarn and not lean into it and say, what does this symbolic imagery mean? Why these three random things, scarlet yarn and hyssop branches and sticks of cedar? And of course, to this day, we have Jewish rabbis who are writing commentaries about why this symbolic material needed to be burnt up with the red heifer. So what I think Jung was leaning into when he was working in those psychiatric wards was that he was leaning into the fact that God himself tends to speak to us in symbol. He tends to speak to us in the realm of what is maybe easier for us to apprehend than to say, maybe give us a lecture which with clear-cut language of exactly what he wants from us. There's something very important about grabbing hold of simple, and Jung found that out very early on. Later, you'll find out that Jung actually saw many people get healed from schizophrenia by his approach. And still to this day, I find that Jung's approach toward schizophrenia, I think, is one of the more effective means to deal with that mental illness. And so we have, from a very early age, someone who is not interested in anything other than what he experientially deals with. So he called himself from the beginning an empirical scientist. And as an empirical scientist, he wanted to make sure that his science came from what he observed, from what he experienced. And he would hold to that label to the very end, which brings us to the conclusion of this particular one. We're going full circle because remember, I started by telling you about his, and what you find in the older Jung that you don't see in the younger is that he was someone who began to recognize that the psyche was trying to speak to God through symbols and through imagery. And he didn't have to say that he had faith in God because he already had empirical knowledge of God. He had experiential, lived experience of God within himself. And so this phrase that's so often goes to kind of damn Jung as not a Christian, I think needed to be relooked at. We need to relook at it. And we'll continue to do that throughout this first season, is to look at Jung as somebody who didn't necessarily do things the way that most of us would do it by starting with faith, but he ended in his life knowing God, and knowing that he existed. And we'll talk about what all that means in later seasons. But I do want to say by saying that we're probably going to be taking a long time uncovering this man, because we deserve to understand what he was trying to bring to Christianity, and also what he was trying to bring to us as people who have psyches that need to be understood. In the next episode, we're going to go much deeper into the word that I used earlier in this podcast, the word individuation, and why I think that's so crucial for us to understand when we're trying to get Carl Jung correct in his what he was teaching. But we will be here every episode. We want you to keep listening. We're trying to bring together a profound union of faith and psychology. And if you're interested in getting emails for the podcast release, go to angelamere.com, because we're going to be releasing the podcast in batches. So it's just angelamere.com. And what I want to do at the end of every podcast is to give you some time to kind of journal, integrate this information, process it as that you need to. And one of the things we covered a little bit today was Jung's ability to recognize the language of the psyche, or the language of the soul, in symbols. And what I'd like you to consider today, as you maybe journal through some of this or process some of this, is what is it that the last time that you felt that symbol really helped you to integrate some new concept into your life? For instance, as Christians, we have the Eucharist, we have communion. These are elements that we eat, we partake, and there is a psychological change that occurs for us when we take the Eucharist, when we take communion. And it's important for us to realize that we are already engaging in symbolic activity that then produces a psychological effect. It happens for us all the time. And maybe you need to journal through what other times in your life where you've done something symbolic to get a psychological shift or transition for yourself. We have the Christian Jung community that's open and available to you, that you're welcome to go join. It's at angelamere.com. We'd love to have you. It's a place where we're integrating faith and psychology as a way to understand both of these together. And we go through some really deep dives with Carl Jung and his psychology. I think you'll really enjoy it. So as you conclude today with these journal prompts, I'd like to do this closing prayer by Saint Hildegard of Bingen, who had some beautiful prayers, but this particular one seemed the correct one for the conclusion for today, which is this: O Holy Spirit, make us vessels of your dreaming breath. This project isn't just a podcast. It's a conversation about waking up to God, to soul, to spirit. If you believe in that work, one of the best ways to support it is simply to share it. Please don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, and share.